If you've been around competitive Pokemon, you have probably heard of the Double Switch. If you're a more casual spectator, though, you might not necessarily know what it is. But you probably get the idea that, oh, that's that elite play that really good players make. And has this become such a household term if it's such an elite, rare move, you might ask? Well, because a lot of players like to show off how much they know in front of other players, and one of the best ways to do this is to demonstrate that you know about double switching, and then to really hammer home how good you are, then you also downplay it. You're going to be describing some game state, and you're like, oh, you lead off with this, and then you double to this, and then you double to that. Oh, yeah, it's really not that big a deal. You know, you just got to double 3 times. And you also know they're good because they don't even call it double switching. They call it doubling. That's how in the zone they are. That's how, high level they are. So, despite that level of exaggeration and braggadocio, the double switch is a big deal because it's not the most intuitive move to make when you start out. And first of all, let's define the double switch, because it's not the most intuitive thing to figure out from the name alone, because you're like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean when 2 players switch at the same time and, it was unintentional? Or, does it mean when you switch to Heatran on the Draco Meteor and then Latios on the Earthquake? Is that a double switch? And no. In general, and there are arguments about this, and they're semantics, but try not to get hung up on the semantics. The basic definition I can think of that covers pretty much everything is switching with the expectation that the opponent will switch as well. And this replay shows the differences between that and the other things which you think it might be. Like the Heatran into Latios on Draco and EQ thing, that would be more an example of pivoting. Because you're not expecting the opponent to switch, you're expecting them to attack and use a different move, so you're dancing around the dangerous attack to bring your Pokemon that can scare the other thing out. Like if the other player has Salamence and you switch to your Heatran, you're not going to stay in with Heatran on Mence, most likely, because Heatran still loses to Mence in that one-on-one. But if you get Latios in on Mence one-on-one, they're faster than Mence and they will scare it out. But you can't switch it right into the Draco Meteor. So you pivot Heatran into the Draco with no intention of keeping it in, and then go to your Lati Twin on the EQ. So that's pivoting. Whereas double switching is as follows. When you play in-game, right, you have your 4 moves or you switch, right? But your 4 moves or your switch are always in relation to the Pokemon that your opponent has out on the field at that time, right? If you've got Milotic, let's say, against Cynthia's Garchomp, and you're picking between Surf, Ice Beam, Hypnosis, and I don't know what your last move is, Strength, because you had to move the boulders in the cave. I don't think Milotic even gets Strength. Point being, you're choosing between those 4 moves and switching, but you know that whatever move you make, like if you decide maybe you want to switch to your Staraptor for Intimidate, then that move is always going to be in relation to Cynthia's Garchomp staying in and using an attack, right? Now, in the competitive world, you are playing against other people who know they can switch far more than the in-game AI. And so, this sometimes leads people to wonder how they make progress against opposing teams that have answers to their own Pokemon. And this is... Actually, progress in Pokemon is another video I want to make. But the basic idea is... how do I break this team? Because when I have my Heatran, let's say, they just switch to their Chansey. And then I go to my fighting type to beat the Chansey, but then they switch to their Gliscor, and they wall my fighting type, or so on and so forth. And, how do I break past? They just switch their counter every time. And I'm getting worn down, too, because my fighting type takes a Seismic Toss from Chansey, and then Heatran takes whatever move. So, and they're healing, and I'm not healing. Now, the progress in Pokemon thing is going to be its own video, but this video about double switching is very much related to it, and it's an important concept to know before you go looking to break past your opponent's team to make meaningful progress. So, that situation we're talking about, where you have your 4 moves or your switch, and now they're also in relation to your opponent possibly switching, right? So let's say you've got your Heatran in on Ferrothorn. You're still usually going to attack, right? Because if you know their water type is going to switch in, maybe you use Earth Power or Hidden Power or Toxic or Will-O-Wisp or Roar or whatever, right? Basically not a fire move, because you know they're going to switch to their water type, right? But let's say their water type is Starmie, and all your Heatran options are things that don't really scare Starmie very much. Earth Power, Wisp, Taunt, whatever, right? And then you just, you click Earth Power or whatever, and you don't do much to Starmie, and then you have to switch into Starmie Surf, and you're like, oh, well, now I'm taking damage from Surf or Scald or whatever. I guess if it's a Ferrothorn gen, it would be Scald. Then, yeah, so then they switch out of Ferrothorn, they go to Starmie, and you have to switch into Scald. Oh, man, I don't like switching into Scald. And then you say, well, how can I get around this? Enter the double switch, where when you've got Heatran versus Ferrothorn, you don't just have to predict by hitting the Starmie for marginally more damage with Earth Power. You can also switch to another Pokemon to take advantage of that Starmie switch. And it's not the most intuitive idea. I mean, it's also not, something that only the most elite player can do, obviously. That would be ridiculous. But it isn't something that comes to a lot of people's minds. And this is why most people, when people are inexperienced at a low level, then they're not going to be considering double switching a lot of the time. And so if you have a decent enough matchup, you can just switch between your counters forever and you'll win. Because they're not going to force the issue. And that's really what double switching is about, forcing the issue. Getting yourself in a good position so you are being more active and not reacting to your opponent's Pokemon. Like, for example, if you have a CB-Tar and you're trying to get it in on a Starmie, rather than just thud into Starmie with your Heatran and then have to go to your CB-Tar on the Starmie, what if you just went right to CB-Tar as the Starmie came in? Right? Things like that. So that's the basic idea. So we've got the concept down, right? I expect my opponent to switch, so I switch to something else, so that rather than switch into my opponent's counter and take damage or status or whatever, I'm already in that position that I want. Rather than have my Medicham risk Thunder Wave from Chansey in Gen 7, let's say, then why wouldn't I just double switch right to it? Yeah, and I don't have to take that Seismic Toss, that T-Wave, because I want the position of Medicham versus Chansey, right? Because that means high jump kick and that means KO. But getting Medicham in on Chansey is not riskless if Medicham is switching into Chansey. Therefore, I want to get Medicham in on the same turn as Chansey comes on the field. So I force Chansey in with my Greninja, and I'm scaring out something like I don't know, let's say a Heatran without Protect, so you know it's not going to stay in, right? So you have your Greninja against the Protectless Heatran, and you scare it out, and in comes Chansey, and when you have got your Greninja in against that Heatran, you know Chansey's coming in, so you don't just Hydro Pump or whatever, and then switch to your Medicham. No, you go right to Medicham. So that's the basic idea, and now we will illustrate this in battle. And all these other concepts... oh, by the way, that's what I wanted to say. I also want to make a video on whether switch moves are broken. And basically the idea is that switch moves are very often like risk-free double switching. But that's another whole other controversy. Anyway, let's get to this battle. So we're not really interested in the specifics. So we've got your T-Tar versus Politoed. So let me just give you a theoretical example, so if you're trying to follow along and trying to figure it out for yourself. So let's say Politoed scares out T-Tar here, right? Let's just say, for example's sake. Let's say Politoed scares out T-Tar here, and you don't want to just Scald into Starmie, right? Then if that were the case, and you were certain T-Tar was switching out, then with Politoed, as Sensei asks you here, you could just double switch to Ferrothorn or Raikou, and then you wouldn't have to switch into Starmie Scald. You would already have your Pharaoh and your Raikou in that threatening position against Starmie without having to switch into it. So if Politoed switches to whatever here, because it's the one forcing T-Tar out, that would be a double switch. Right? Okay. Well, Finch is using an offensive Rocks T-Tar, which is very rare. So, and he just goes for the Scald because he recognizes it's an offensive team, and Starmie is going to be offensive, so scalding into it is actually a good thing. But let's not get hung up on the details. So, Protect and T-Tar goes down, and now Perma-Rain game. So Starmie has this. So Ferrothorn switches in here. Excuse me. Leech Seed goes off on the Scizor. Okay, so see, that is not a double switch. See, this is why don't get hung up on the definition of it. Because I think this could qualify as a pivot or a double switch, depending on what Finch was thinking here. Because either, it could be both at the same time, so don't get hung up on the definition, but just the idea of incorporating switching into your game, knowing the opponent can switch, is the basic idea, right? Anyway, so Scizor in on Ferrothorn. Now, this switch could serve the possibility. I mean, forget getting hung up on the possibility of switching to predict the opponent's switch. Just to figure out how to more incorporate switching into your game in general, rather than just thudding into the opponent. So let's say Scizor stays in here, superpowers into Tentacruel, and Tentacruel eats up superpower for no damage, and then rapid spins and goodbye rocks forever, right? That would be bad. So, Scizor, I think this would be a double switch, but if it was, you could also make the argument that Finch was expecting rocks to go up here, and he was going to SD with Scizor and kill the Tentacruel as it switched in, but once he got Leech Seeded, he decided, okay, I do not want my Leech Seeded Scizor facing off against Ferrocruel, so I'm going to pivot to my Garchomp so I can get a good matchup against both of them unleech seeded, right? So you can see how it could be either, because I think there is another example of pivoting in this game, which is more clear in its intent as a pivot and not a potential double switch. But here it's likelier that, yeah, that Tentacruel is going to come in, and I want my Garchomp facing off against it so it doesn't spin for free. So that is actually another example of a double switch that I wasn't even planning. But yeah, it could be a pivot, could be a double switch, could be both. So now rocks go up, Chomp is in, and there's the SD. Politoed's going to protect and get that extra lefties, and Scald's no burn. We don't know if the Chomp's lefties or not. Pivot into Latias. A non-double switch pivot would have been if Politoed came in, drew the EQ, and then instantly switched to Latias on the EQ. Because you want the Latias in on the Garchomp, right? But you don't want to switch it into the Dragon move, which theoretically could have come out first if it was a CB Chomp or something. So if you had gone to Politoed to scout the Dragon move and draw the EQ, and then go to Latias, that would have been a pivot. And I realize that this is a theoretical example more than what is actually going on in the game, but I'm trying to give as many examples of this as possible. So Exca switches in here, and that's going to get the spin off, recover, switch. Now that's a double switch. That is a pure double switch. So here, Sensei Axew on the previous turn recognizes, okay, that Excadrill is scarfed, locked into rapid spin. And my Latias is going to do absolutely nothing to that Scizor coming in, right? So, and Finchnator is forced to go to Scizor because nothing else takes Dragon Pulse, right? So, knowing that Scizor is coming in, Sensei Axew double switches to Suicune to get a good one-on-one against Scizor, and fire off Scalds and get going with Subcall My Protect stuff. I guess you could argue that it should have been a Tentacruel there to get the spin-off, but, point being, it was a double switch to one of these waters to take advantage of the Scizor there, right? Because if you're just playing it straight, and this will kill so many players, if you just play it straight and you're like, okay, well, now I have a free turn with Latias, so I'll Dragon Pulse and a little damage on Scizor. Oh, no, now I have to switch into Scizor, and oh, no, he double switched to Garchomp as I went to Tentacruel, and now I'm behind, and, well, this was a perfect opportunity for against choice Pokemon is the easiest, safest way to practice double switching, because you know what move they're locked into. so you can create these win-win scenarios, the middle ground. That's another video I want to make, the middle ground play. But yeah, you know that no matter what, on this next turn, Finch is either switching or he's going to be locked in a rapid spin. You know, there is no other option. There is no universe in which Finch goes, LOL, I just predicted your switch and used Earthquake, because he can't. He's scarfed. He's locked into it. So against choice moves is the safest way to start practicing double switching. It's because it's very riskless there. So yeah, so now Suicune comes in as the Scizor comes in, and So now Starmie comes in on the Scald, and yeah, okay, so now that's a great example of a pivot. I guess it could count as both, because it also, you could also just want Garchomp in on Suicune, theoretically, if you just want to weaken it for your Dragonite, because Dragonite looks pretty terrifying with Suicune taking a hit. Or you could get Chomp in on Ferrothorn again. Either is fine, but basically get Chomp in on Starmie, on Suicune without switching into a Scald, let's say. I think the double switch route is more common, but if we're taking it as a pivot, like in the event that Starmie doesn't threaten Suicune that much and Suicune's going to Calm Mind, let's say you want Chomp in on the Suicune and you don't want it switching right into a Scald, then you have to pivot the Starmie in, draw a Calm Mind or a Protect, and then get Garchomp in, right? Now, this could serve... This is why switching and middle ground plays are so effective in making progress, and I realize I've got a lot of different videos coming up on these interrelated subjects. But the basic idea, I hope, is clear, and, you know, that's what the comment section is for, if not. But you've got, you either catch the opponent's switch, or you catch the pivot around Starmie's move, whether Protect or Calm Mind or whatever. So, generally, switching offers a lot of flexibility, rather than just playing it straight and using the super effective, or even the not super effective move. Like, even if Starmie Hydros or Ice Beams into Ferrothorn there, it's like, okay, cool, that didn't do much. So, yeah, there's the SD, there's the Scalds, I think that, so the Chomp gets burned and does approximately nothing. I think that was more a double switch on Ferrothorn kind of thing. I don't know, who knows. Not really important. Now D-Knight comes in, and Pharaoh comes in, and it's going to double dance. I think that's all the switching in this game, because that's not really relevant. There's Outrage. There's Protect. And stuff happens, and it's not really important. Oh, no, I think there is one more double switch. Okay, so now here's a great one. Double switching around Protect is always a funky game. But here we have the Excadrill, which is not Mold Breaker, locking into EQ and giving Latias a free switch, and there's no way that Sensei Axew is going to just let Raikou die and, you know, potentially get cleaned up by Starmie and, you know, maybe even Scizor. But likelier, it's more important against Starmie, because the other two are not very good against it. At least until Latias starts boosting, but that's what Scizor's for, and Scizor tends to run SD Life Orb Pursuit, so that's even less reliable. So basically, I mean, Finch has got an advantage in this 3-on-3 anyway, but the basic idea is Latias is coming in here. I don't want to switch into the Dragon Pulse and get worn down with Scizor, or because, you know, Scizor without investment and with Life Orb is not the bulkiest. And even more importantly, if Latias comes in on the EQ, that's when, and then draws into Scizor, that's when Sensei Axew might be in a better position to pull off the double switch himself, because then Finch is not going to want to stay in with that EQ locked Excadrill into the Latias, which could potentially start doing some nonsense. You know, if it's sub-Calm Mind, then and you start giving it free turns, that's when it's going to get hairy. And because the Scizor's not that bulky, so you can't afford to stay in and throw out another EQ for the double switch. You know, at high levels of play, some players do check for the double switch. It seems like a hard thing to wrap your mind around. Like, oh, how am I supposed to predict when the opponent will double switch? And you come to find that it is a move like any other, and it is to be accounted for once you know your opponent is taking it into consideration. And sometimes you do predict the double switch, but it's like any other move. You know, you don't always want to Earth Power into the opponent's fortress with your Heatran, and then, you know, for fear of getting Earthquake, stuff like that. You know, that's functionally not that different from staying in on something that potentially KOs you to catch a double switch. It's been known to happen. Here Finch's double switch is not necessarily just to protect from the Latias doing funky stuff, but to guard himself from Sensei Axu's own later double switch. So there's that double to the Scizor. See, because it was Finch switching with the intent to catch the switch from Sensei Axu, right? So now we've got your Scizor on your Latias action, which is what Finch wanted. He SD'd and Latias subbed instead of going right to Tentacruel, and now that's not really important. Oh, it's not Pursuit, I forgot. It's got Quick Attack. So, yeah, now it is a Scizor sweep. Enabled by a double switch. So, that is all from me. Thank you for watching. I hope this was informative. Please leave a comment if you needed. And what movie am I recommending today? Black Christmas from 1974. One of the greatest slasher movies ever. If you think slasher movies are dumb, you have not seen Black Christmas. Or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but we're going with Black Christmas. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.